Okay. Hi, everyone. So welcome to Women on the Rise Lightning Talks. Today, we're going to be exploring around different topics around career growth, leadership, work-life balance, mentorship, challenges, and the lessons that we've learned. And we're all going to be hearing about this from our experienced Pioneer alumni. So my name is Marilyn Gracia, and I'm from the Alumni Association Board. And today, we are joined by fellow alumni, Nina Tran. So she's currently serving as the CFO of Veritas Investments Incorporated and joins us with over 25 years of experience in building, leading, managing teams. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nina.
Thank you for having me.
So awesome to have you here. And so let's just start off by, can you just share a little bit of your journey about what your career path looked like and what it brought to you to today?
Yeah, sure. So first, I just want to say thank you to Penny Peak and Travis Nelson for inviting me to participate on the Women on the Rise program. So I'm honored to be here. So to your question about what was my career path and how did I get to become CFO, after I graduated, I basically started with a public accounting firm. Back then, it was the Big 8 public accounting firm. So I'm dating myself a little bit. And they came on campus to recruit. So I worked for Coopers & Lybrand, which has now merged with Pricewaterhouse to be PricewaterhouseCoopers as an auditor for the first 4 years of my career. And then from there, I joined a company called A&B Property Corporation, and I spent 18 years there doing many different roles throughout those 18 years. And I think at A&B is where I was able to sort of develop my skill set and be able to step up and take on more roles. I had various roles there, starting as a financial manager, and then I helped with special projects to help the company go public in 1997. We expanded internationally, and so I was part of the team that went to different countries to help establish the back office for the company. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time in Amsterdam, in Tokyo, in Shanghai, various cities, so that we can learn about the culture and the aspects of doing business there. And that was a huge experience for me. Then I became a controller for the retail division for a while before we sold that off. And then I was fortunate enough to be promoted to Chief Accounting Officer. And did that for many years before we then merged with the biggest industrial operator at that time called Prologis. So now the company, after the merger, the company is now called Prologis. And so at the merger, I helped with just integrating two of everything, two systems, two processes, and so forth. So my title then was the Chief Global Process Officer and doing the merger integration of two companies. So that was really a great experience. From there, I got a recruiter call. They were looking for a CFO for a company called Waypoint Homes, which was a new sector in the real estate industry, and they did single family rental. And so I had the chance to become CFO after 18 years at A&B Prologis. And I was CFO for Waypoint for about 4 years. We went through a couple of mergers and acquisitions during that time. We also went public during that time. And then from there, I am now CFO at Veritas Investments based in San Francisco. And Veritas invests in multifamily assets throughout the Bay Area as well as Southern California. So that's my path.
Awesome. And such an eventful journey along the way. What would you say has been some of your biggest challenges early on in your career? And then even if you have any current challenges that you're experiencing now?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest challenge is always finding time. Think about my career early on. I raised my hand a lot to do projects and help out, and I worked a lot. I worked a lot of hours, and so it was finding time to do everything that I wanted to do and just soak in the experience and continue to learn and be challenged. So time was probably a big challenge during the early part of my career. And then when I had kids, it was also, finding the time to balance the work that I had and the responsibilities I had, and also being a mother and trying to make sure that, as a mother, you're still trying to build your career, that guilt of not being home all the time with the kids and sharing in all of the different activities. That was a challenge. And then now that my kids are a little older, my challenge is, now I'm joining boards. I sit on a public board based in Denver, and I volunteer more. I'm trying to give back to the community. So finding time to do all of that in addition to my full-time job as CFO and as a mom.
Yeah, so time then and time now.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar has the same issue.
Yeah. That's amazing. You've mentioned many monumental moments, I feel like, in your career, a lot of great transitions. What would you say was a pivotal moment for yourself, or perhaps a milestone that really led you to be successful today?
Yeah, I think just thinking back at my time at AMB, now Prologis, the 18 years, I always asked for an opportunity that I may not have had experience doing. And one of the opportunities that I asked for, we owned a subsidiary up in Canada, and it was a public entity. And at that time, my boss then was the CFO, and I was the senior vice president. And he was going to assume the CEO role of that subsidiary. And so I asked if I can then be the CFO of that public entity. And so he was, had enough confidence in me to allow me to do that. And I think that was a pivotal moment, because it actually got me a chance to, play that CFO role, but in a smaller context under a subsidiary. And so that was helpful in sort of steering my career towards where I am today. That's
awesome. I think it's really important that I think as women, we tend to feel like we shouldn't ask. And you did just that. And that's really amazing. So what would you say are some of the habits and practices that you engage in that attribute to your everyday success?
I work hard. I think my advice to anybody on this webinar is, work hard, because you will be noticed for your effort, but work smart as well. So be resourceful, ask a lot of questions. I mean, I think if you've got a boss who is supportive of you and peers who are team players, they're always great resources to help you when you need it. And so for me, it's about working hard, but at the same time working smart and being flexible also, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I've got companies where you think you're on a certain path, and then a merger happens and everything is completely different in terms of direction, and people are moving in and out of the company. So you have to be adaptable as well, and that's worked well for me.
Very adaptable, yes. And at any time, did you ever feel imposter syndrome throughout your journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've had almost 30 years of experience now with my career. And even today, I do still experience the imposter syndrome. And for those who don't know what that is, it's you sort of doubting your accomplishments and, second guessing that, should I be in this room or should I be here in this role? So yeah, I still actually experience that once in a while, even now at my role at a C-level executive position. I think throughout my career, especially being in the real estate industry, early on, I was the only woman, and most of the time, the only minority in the room. And so having that coupled with this imposter syndrome that sometimes gives you self-doubt was difficult. And I think how you get through it is you've got to be more confident, you have to believe in yourself, and you have to think that, hey, you have the experience, just as much experience or just as much competency as the man in the room as well. So just over time, that experience of being able to speak up, knowing your subject matter, helps you overcome the imposter syndrome.
Great advice, great advice. And as a leader in your industry, what are some ways that you have promoted successful team building?
I mean, I think to start, you need to be a very authentic leader so that people feel like they want to follow you. You want to be inclusive as well. So I try my best to make sure that I am including everybody in a conversation, being proactive in communicating what is going on with the company, what are our goals and objectives, and laying that out for the team so that they understand where we're headed and the mission that we are trying to accomplish. I do encourage my teams to ask a lot of questions. So one of the things I do when I have my monthly finance and accounting team meetings, I ask the team members to come prepared with a question on a Post-it note, and they write it down anonymously on a Post-it note, and before the meeting, they post it on the wall of the conference room. And so we walk in and one wall is filled with all these Post-it notes with questions. And we spend the last 10 to 15 minutes of our meeting going over those questions. So it gives the team an ability to sort of ask questions openly, and then we spend time answering those. And that helps to build that team camaraderie a lot. We also do, on an annual basis, we try to do team outings. We do scavenger hunts. You know, we've done sip and paint where somebody guides us through step-by-step painting. We've done bowling. Previous companies, we've actually done overnight trips as well to various locations, spa day, things like that. So it just gets the team a chance to step outside of the office and bond with one another in a more social, you know, relaxed environment. So we try to do that as often as we can.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. You're so engaged in your work and in your interactions with people. How do you manage your work along with your family life and everything else that you engage in?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think I've been lucky because I've had a spouse who has been very supportive. He's a stay-at-home spouse, and so he does all the grocery shopping, all the cooking. I'm a horrible cook, so he does all the cooking. Most of when we had kids early on, he handled most of the kids' activities and, you know, volunteered at their schools and so forth. And so it gave me a chance to really focus on my career and not feel so guilty. I still had a little bit mom guilt, but not so guilty about missing out. But when I knew he was there for the kids and knew that he was helping with the home life, it gave me a little more comfort that I can continue to focus on my career. So I know not everybody has that luxury, but if you've got, you know, family members, whether it's your parents or a sibling or, you know, a spouse or a significant other, that can help you not only with the physical support of doing various things, but more the emotional and psychological. So I think that really helps to balance your career and your work and you know, just home life altogether.
Yeah, quality of life, having a great system definitely makes a difference. So would you like to share a time that you really had to advocate for yourself throughout your professional journey?
You know, I was lucky. I think I worked for some previous bosses that really championed my capabilities and really was confident in what I can do. So the advocating was from somebody else to give me. So as far as self-advocating, I mean, I think we should do that throughout our lives. People should do that in school, you know, advocate with teachers and professors, do that throughout your career with your boss and the executives at your company. But I think for me, probably an example of that is when I switched roles, leaving Prologis and taking on my first real CFO role. I didn't have the experience, right? I didn't have real CFO experience. They were looking for somebody to help take the company public. I had that. I did have IPO experience and I did have some M&A experience. So I think advocating for myself from that perspective to share the experience that I had, the skill set that I can bring to the table, allowed me to, you know, be able to sell that, hey, I can do the CFO role, just give me a chance. So I think that was probably an example of me just advocating while I was interviewing, basically, for a new role, that next step in my career. Ended up getting the job.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the idea that, surrounding yourself with a great support system inside your professional life and outside of your professional life. It's very key and important. And have you received any, or what is some great advice that you've received that really helped you advance your career?
Yeah, I had a informal mentor, a woman, and she was back then she was on a different board, and I met up with her, and one of the things that she told me was, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. I think men are good at, selling and BSing their way through more than women. We are just not as good at it. And she said, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but let me get back to you. I'll follow up and I'll get back to you. And I thought that was, it sounds pretty basic, but it's sort of profound at that point, because again, if you think about what I said earlier, me being the only woman in full of men in that real estate industry, I always felt like, oh, I need to know the answer. I have to make sure that I'm, playing at the same playing field as all of these men. But when she sort of said that, I think it helped me to reflect that it's okay to not know. It's okay to do your research and reach out to people and get the answer. And if you're going to tell somebody, I don't know, but I'll get back to you, you definitely need to get back to them.
Get back to them.
Yeah, exactly. So make sure that you hold to your word on that. But yeah, that was really great advice that I've been continuing to heed today.
And speaking of advice, do you happen to have a mentor? And if so, how did you go about finding one? Or do you have any recommendations about how other people can go about finding a mentor?
Mm-hmm. I don't have any official mentors. I still reach out to my former bosses and my former CEOs at previous companies whenever I need advice or whenever I need someone to bounce an idea off, as a sounding board. So I would consider them informally as my mentors, and they'll continue to be that throughout the rest of my career. The advice to those on the call today would be, don't always look for someone that's too similar to you. I found that my mentors who had different backgrounds, different experiences, actually provided really good advice. It's a different perspective on how you should attack an issue. And so I would just encourage people to find somebody. If you're working now, it's not necessarily your boss. It might be a department head from a different department. Might be somebody outside of the company that you might find when you go to a panel. I actually had a woman reach out to me after she saw me on one of these panels, and she hunted me down and asked if I can be her mentor. And that was 2 years ago. And I meet with her quarterly to give her advice, check in. And, she's changed careers 2 times during that span. And so I think you just want to find somebody that you're comfortable with, that you feel like can give you that input, but it doesn't need to be so formal, And a lot of companies actually have mentorship programs. So at our company, we actually have an official mentorship program where people sign up, and then we pair you with leaders in the organization.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a really great program. And thank you so much for sharing that advice with our alumni. So reflecting back, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Probably not in my career. I think if I had the time, I may have gone back to get my MBA. So I guess it's not too late. I can still do that. But yeah, maybe going back and getting my MBA degree would have been something different. I think those hindsight, just given everything that's happened and the challenge of time constraint that I mentioned earlier, it wouldn't have been possible for me. And I think for the decisions that I made at that time, it was the right decision not to go back and pursue the MBA degree. So really, no regrets.
Yeah. You're a very accomplished woman. So I think you could have done without, without that. So I think we do have some time for some questions from our audience. So we'll go with first question. It says, how did Cal State East Bay prepare you for your career?
So I spent the first 2 years of college at UC Davis. And when I started there, I really didn't know that I was going into business. I thought maybe I would go down the pre-med avenue. And after taking some biology and chemistry classes, I knew that was not my path. And so then I took an accounting class, and it came easy to me. I got the concept, and I actually enjoyed it. So I transferred from UC Davis to Cal State, and the business school was great. They were able to provide resources in terms of, the Beta Alpha Psi was an accounting club. I think it's still around, if I recall. And they would bring in different companies that were interested in recruiting the students. And like I mentioned earlier, that's how I landed my first job out of school, was with a company that came on campus and did and interviewed the students on campus. So yeah, Cal State provided a great forum for us to not only learn the aspects of different classes within the business school, but provided that network for us to be recruited and get to know companies out there.
That's awesome. Let's see, next question from, that question was from Alan. So we're gonna take the next question from Ashani De Silva. It says, so how do you address negative news?
Oh, that's a good question. We've actually dealt with a lot of negative news lately, especially us right now. The company that I work for is a landlord or an owner of multifamily assets in San Francisco. So we get a lot of negative press around being a landlord and so forth. But I think what you need to do is just think about, what is the true story? What is the message and the positive points that we want to convey, and try to get it out there as much as we can to counterbalance the negative news or the negative PR that might have misinformation. So, sometimes it's just trying to stay as positive as you can, and counter the negative points with what you can share from your experience, and sharing the positive aspects of that.
It's very important. We're going to take a next question from Mia. Do you have any suggestions for someone who is making a career change, specifically their transition advancement into a higher healthcare field has been difficult?
Good question. I think talk to a lot of people. Talk to people who are in the healthcare or whatever that next career move or that next industry that you're interested in. Find people that are doing it today and ask them what they like about it, what they don't like, what they would have done differently, and learn about their own path. And just make sure that you're prepared to take on whatever's ahead. And also network. I think being able to let people know that you're making that career switch and looking for a job, and sharing, maybe for those that you are reaching out to, sharing your resume and your capabilities with them, so that they know what you can potentially bring to that next role. But definitely just reaching out to people, talking to others that are in that field before you make that leap, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of, different job transitions and leaps, we have a question from Anu. Question is, what is the next career move from a C-level position, and how would you do it?
Retirement. I think the next stage in my career is probably more board of director positions. So I think I mentioned earlier, I sit on a public board today based in Denver called AIMCO. And I was just recently made audit committee chair of one of the committees on the board. And I really enjoy the work. I enjoy being more strategic and helping to think about that company's path versus all of the day-to-day management. And I think my next career move is probably taking on more board positions, volunteering for nonprofits, and not necessarily taking on another full-time position. But I say that every year, and then I go find a full-time position. So you never know.
Thank you so much for answering their questions. I don't see that we have any more questions for them. So I'm just gonna give a few closer questions. Let's see, what is one tangible tip that you can offer for our audience who's attended the event today?
Yeah, I would say, and I mentioned this earlier, is to raise your hand a lot throughout your career. Raise your hand for special projects that may not be your normal day-to-day task or your normal job responsibility. I think looking back at my own career, that's what I did a lot. And I think people who see you jump in, be a team player, can execute on those projects will recognize that effort, and you'll be rewarded with, promotion and compensation along the way. I think that's where those champions of you step up and say, hey, Nina did this for me and it was great, and I really think she can take on the next role. So raise your hand a lot. Do things that you think you may not be capable of doing, like stepping outside of your comfort zone and really proving yourself. I think you'll be surprised what you can achieve. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is don't work for jerks. Life's too short.
I like that one.
Find a job that you really love. Find a boss that you really love to work for. Somebody who's going to be supportive of you, and someone who is going to advocate for you and champion and do all of that to make sure that you are challenged and continue to learn, and you have somebody who supports you at your job and for your career growth. So those two things are important, and I think that helped me throughout my career. So hopefully those are two helpful, tangible tips.
Well, thank you so much, Nina. I think this is a really great thought for everyone for us to close out on. And since we are out of time, I just want to thank you for joining us today. But before we go, if people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just send me a connection request, or my email at the current company is ntran@veritasinv.com. So you can also look at Veritas Investments on our website, and you can find me through that as well.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone else who joined us today and joined Nina as our guest on the Women on the Rise Lightning Talks, and for sharing so much of your experience and advice with our fellow alumni here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our Pioneer alumni, thank you so much for joining us this evening for the conversation. We are going to be hosting Women on the Rise Lightning Talks monthly, so I hope that you do join us for the next one. Be sure to check out for your emails. The next one is going to be in July. Thank you so much, and everyone have a great weekend.